the What Bitcoin Did podcast.
Hi there, how are you all? Hope you're all having a great week. Welcome to the What Bitcoin Did podcast, simply the best Bitcoin podcast in Bedford. I'm your host, Peter McCormack, and today I've got an amazing interview with John Carvalho, who you might know as Bitcoin Errorlog. But first, I have a message from my show sponsors. If you're interested in a crypto-backed loan, well, BlockFi is the leading crypto to USD lender, servicing customers worldwide, including 47 US states. And their interest rates are now as low as 4.5%. Also, BlockFi accepts Bitcoin, Ether, or Litecoin as collateral. Customers can be funded in USD or GUSD, which is Gemini's dollar-backed stablecoin, and you can go from application to funding in as little as 30 minutes. If you sign up at blockfi.com/whatbitcoindid, you can get $25 in free crypto added to customer collateral loans for under $10,000 or $50 in free crypto added to customer collateral loans over $10,000, and applying takes less than 2 minutes. That is blockfi.com, which is blockfi.com/whatbitcoindid. Also, if you like What Bitcoin Did, you should check out the Transatlantic Cable podcast from Kaspersky Lab. They look at cybersecurity issues that affect everybody and also make sure the podcast fits into your busy schedule by keeping them to 20 minutes or less. Check it out and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from by searching for the Transatlantic Cable podcast. Okay, so on to my interview with John. And there is an interesting background to this one. Prior to the interview, I was muted by John on Twitter. I didn't know for sure, but I'd kind of suspected it. And it's kind of been a bit of a pattern for me. I think there's at least 3 other interviews I've done where I've been blocked by the guest before the interview started. I'd had a couple of debates with him online over a couple of things, and if I'm totally honest, I probably didn't understand enough of his background. I kind of respect what he's done for Bitcoin in the past. And as I've been going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, I spent some time recently on the old mailing list for S2X, reading all the different things that people were saying into the build up to the potential hard fork, and I noticed a number of posts from John where he was vehemently defending Bitcoin. So after that, I reached out to him. I apologized. And then he had seen a couple of my Bitcoin Twitter posts. And so we've kind of rebuilt the bridge there. And so chatting to him, I said, look, I would love to get you on a podcast. I would love to do a show talking about defending Bitcoin. And yeah, he was cool with it. So yeah, so this is what you're going to hear now. We discuss why defending Bitcoin is so important to him, the various attacks. And yeah, I got to say, I really love this interview and hopefully you will too. And as you know, if you've got any questions about it, you can reach out to me. And listen, look, if you want to support the show, there's a section on my website that explains everything you can do, from subscribing to the show on Patreon to leaving me a review. If you head over to whatbitcoindid.com and you click on the support section, you can find out more about that there. And I also want to thank my first Patreon top tier sponsor, Elite Crypto Consulting, your personalized trading teacher. Thank you guys. Thank you for supporting the podcast. Okay, so on to the interview. As I said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email address is hello@whatbitcoindid.com, and I look forward to hearing from you. Hi John, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How was your Christmas?
Oh, not bad, not bad. Just visited some friends.
And are you all back to work now?
Yep, back to work today.
Before we start, I just want to go to one of your tweets you said recently. You watched the new Black Mirror Bandersnatch and you said it was annoying.
Yeah, it was. I don't know, it's just different when you want to sit down and watch TV. You don't want to have to... I had mine set up playing from my laptop, but I was watching from the couch, so I kind of had to move to go and change it with the mouse, and I was just like, this sucks. And I was hoping that I could at least watch it and let it pick for me at random, and I would get somewhere. But it has a lot of loops in it, so eventually I just want to, I want to be able to immerse myself, not just play with it, you know?
Yeah, I wrote down that I enjoyed it as an experiment, but I really prefer a storyteller to tell me a story rather than me pick. But one thing I found was quite interesting is that, I don't know about you, but I've always got my phone with me and I'm messing around with it, whatever I'm watching. You couldn't do that with Bandersnatch. You had to put your phone down.
That would have been a lot easier. If I could watch it on Netflix.com or on Netflix app on my TV and then hold the thing and can use it as a controller, it would have been less annoying. But I don't know. It wasn't just that. It was just that the overall story... It didn't make me feel so immersed. They tried a little bit, they were trying to say, I feel like I'm being controlled by someone else. And then when I stopped choosing, they said, it seems like you've just given up, in the lines. So I thought it was funny. But I don't know. After a while, it just got boring. The storyline wasn't that... I liked the meta aspect, but it wasn't that good to be able to just keep clicking.
Yeah. So I'll let people know there's spoilers, so if nobody's seen it, they should probably just skip for a couple of minutes. But just out of interest, do you remember what your ending was?
I may have gotten more than one ending, but the one I recall is I got an ending where he got a 5-star review for the game, and also he ends up fighting his psychiatrist and killing his dad and killing the programmer. This might be two different endings, but and then you get a 5-star ending, and then it goes even more meta, and it talks about the girl that makes it this Bandersnatch. She finds the old video game from the movie, and she makes the Netflix game.
Right. Okay. So I got that in one of my loops, but my ending, the game didn't get released, and he ended up in prison.
Yeah, I may have saw that one too. I don't know. I got really passive when it was on, and I just was clicking things, and I was just fucking around on my phone, so I forget what was what.
I do want to see the stats though. I hope they release the stats because I went for the most macabre route. Like I was like,
Yeah.
kill everyone, chop them up, just kind of totally destroy them.
Yeah, they said there's 5 endings and like a trillion variations or something crazy. I don't know. No
Yeah.
thanks.
No, I mean the coolest thing for me of it though was the constant references to Metalhead because that's my favorite episode of Black Mirror.
I don't remember the names of the episodes. I do like Black Mirror a lot though. I think my favorite episode is the one with the point system, with the guy who has to jog and get points, and the girl turns into a camp girl.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, listen, look, I'm glad we've got to do this. It might never have happened. We can get into that. But I don't usually do origin stories because they always exist. But actually, I kind of want to do yours because of what we're going to talk about. So can you give me the background for you discovering Bitcoin and kind of what the eureka moment was for you where you realized it was so important?
I mean, it didn't start so flashy. It was just simply heard about Silk Road and how you could buy drugs online with Bitcoin, and that got me into reading about Bitcoin. A lot of people from that started Bitcoin around the time I did have the same story. And when I actually started reading into it, my mind was blown, and I spent probably 12 months just fully immersing myself deeper and deeper and deeper, and everything just kind of clicked for me, and I never got out of that black hole, that rabbit hole. Basically from the first day I hopped into the Bitcoin Talk forums and hopped onto IRC and started chatting with people and stuff. It was done for me. Like Bitcoin swallowed me whole.
And a question I like to ask some people, and it's not to get a functional description because that's kind of easy to get, but I do like to ask people, what is Bitcoin?
What is Bitcoin? Fuck.
Yeah.
It's basically a way. I'll tell you what I tell people who don't know anything about Bitcoin. When they ask me this question, I just tell them it's like a way to have cash on the internet. And that's really the kind of simplest way to give it to somebody quickly that I found without having to get into the details. But then if they want more details, I'll talk about how that there's no one company or person that controls it. And so it allows people to not have to trust each other, and how it's a push pay method instead of a pull. So basically, instead of having customer protection, you have merchant protection. That's kind of how I tell it to them.
Okay. And I also like to bring out quotes. I usually, when I prepare the structure of my interviews, I get quotes for people. I've got a few of yours in here, but quite an interesting one recently is that Bitcoin is a grind. It won't just win in a moment. It will grind everything inferior into submission, kicking and screaming, swallowed whole.
Yeah, I was feeling a little poetic, I guess. But no, that concept is important to me. Like I told you about how it swallowed me whole, and I really feel like there's a phenomenon aspect of Bitcoin where it's like it has this extreme amount of gravity, and the closer you get to it, the harder it is to get away. And I also think it's important because people like to talk about Bitcoin as if it's like Bitcoin maximalism, as if it's like an obviously proven theory, and everybody should just believe it and believe now. But people don't think about the actual time that it might take. Yeah, I believe that Bitcoin will win. I believe that Bitcoin is the best. I believe that altcoins and shitcoins and ICOs are mostly a distraction and just capitalizing on speculators and greed. But I don't know how long it will take for Bitcoin to win. So I think it's always important to think about the time and the struggles that it might have to go through to get to this ideal.
I think that's quite an interesting point on the gravity as well. And I think maybe one of the reasons kind of had a disagreement, not just with you, just ended up pissing off a whole bunch of people at once, is that it's the time frame of when you come into Bitcoin. So when I came in, it wasn't really just Bitcoin. It was Bitcoin, but very prominent other projects. With Ethereum on Coinbase, it was quite prominent other projects. So I didn't really have a huge frame of reference for why Bitcoin was so much more important than these other ones. It was it was a couple of things or a few things I had to learn about at the same time. And it's only over a period of, say, 2 years and a year of doing all these interviews, 60 interviews, researching and speaking to people, I found the gravity of Bitcoin draw me in. And I think that's maybe why when new people come into cryptocurrencies as a category, they don't always understand Bitcoin maximalism straight away, or why Bitcoin is different and so important. Do you appreciate that?
I do. I actually really appreciate that, and your story in particular. It's the perfect story of why I do what I do. I don't know how much of a role I played in getting you there, but I was there in the beginning, and this is why, I'm not known for being the most friendly or fluffy guy when it comes to people that want to argue on social media or even in video, but I'm never lying, I'm never hustling, I'm never trying to deceive someone, and I spend a lot of time on it, and I have no idea why. I'm compelled to defend Bitcoin. I have no choice. It's just what I do. And when I work hard at it, and when I see someone that is refusing to to try on these shoes just for a minute and listen, I do get frustrated, and I can be a little bit mean, I guess. And to see how you went from really frustrating me in how you were responding, and me just not even wanting to, I just muted you. I just didn't want to hear your noise. And eventually coming back and seeing some of the things you were saying months or a year later, I don't know how long it was, but I was like, yes, okay, it's not a waste of time. It's too bad we can't get these people earlier. I don't know. We have to figure out how to get them earlier, but it does work. People do figure it out.
Right. I was muted. I thought I was muted. I tried a couple of times to engage, and I was like, either he's ignoring me or he's muted me. And no, look, I get it. And I think also at the time I was probably, I don't know, my podcast had gone very well, and I have the ability to sometimes get a bit, I don't want to say cocky, but maybe just don't think things through. And I hadn't appreciated the work that other people had done. And the turning point for me, it was two things. Firstly, getting into arguments with Ripple coiners, I kind of thought this must be how someone like John or Dan or Medium Squeeze feel. All these people feel, just having the same argument over and over again. Like, there's so many times you can have it, and you just think, I can't be bothered anymore.
And yeah, it's not just that. It's also that because we've had it so many times, we developed like an elevator speech for them, and we don't take the time to give you detail. We can't give every new person all the detail every time in order to say enough to convince them. We have to hope our shorthand is good enough, because there's just too much. And I don't know, there's some good quote about this, like the amount of energy it takes to create bullshit is 10 times less than the amount it takes to refute it. I forget the quote, but it's a good one.
And it's quite hard to change someone's mind, right?
Yeah.
You come in with an argument, you kind of have to find it yourself. And the second turning point for me was, like, I've not said about this before, but I kind of had this idea for a book at one point, like doing all these interviews. I kind of had an idea for doing this book, which I don't know if I'll ever do, because I don't think I'm a writer. But in doing so, I did a lot of research into the history of Bitcoin, the chronology, and I went through all the email threads from the S2X mailing list. And what happened was I was going through them, and it's quite interesting. It's almost like a who's who of Bitcoin, like all these people, these names that you see discussing. And what was quite interesting is I noticed that there are a number of prominent names who were really not arguing against S2X, but just trying to technically ensure the right things were happening. So someone like Adam Back would just saying need to ensure that there's replay protection and SPV and a few other things I don't understand, by the way. And then I was seeing all these Bitcoin error log posts where you were like firmly like just not having it.
Yeah, because look, that was a really epic time. The SegWit 2x, and it was even years leading up to it. And I've been in some way watching or participating in all of it. But I'm not a developer, so I'm not the guy making this code. And I think that, I don't know, maybe it's egotistical of me, but when I see people like Adam Back and Charlie Lee being very even-handed and reasonable about everything, I think it's not enough. Because the people that are trying to believe the wrong thing or the bad thing or the thing that they're being sold snake oil about, they see that as permission to believe that when people are nice. And so I feel like I don't mind showing my ass. I'll be the one fucking asshole, screaming at people and being rude to them. And I'm not even that rude. I'm just very candid, I'm very cut to the chase, and I'm not accepting bullshit. And when I see people being nice, I want to make sure people realize, the cold hard part of it, and try that on as well.
Well, so what actually happened was, and it was quite a humbling experience though, I didn't read all the threads and all the messages. I kind of just went through the names of people I liked, and then obviously I saw a couple from you, and I've got quotes here, but there were a few things that you put in there that
I don't even remember this.
Oh, I've got them here. I mean, well, actually quite early on also, I've got it here. I even wrote down July 25th, where you put, "Please remove me from this mailing list. This project and its supporters are a joke." But actually, most of your points were even-handed, but you weren't rude, you weren't aggressive, but you were defending Bitcoin rather than just having the same kind of like, rather than just talking just about the tech. You were kind of saying this is ridiculous. You were pointing out the miner support with the futures pricing. But the thing that stood out for me, like, explained it to me in a way that I never understood. It just didn't cross my mind at the time. But I thought what was going to happen is it would be an upgrade and Bitcoin would continue. But you put in there, I'm going to read it to you, a hard fork can never be Bitcoin, and Bitcoin can't even die. You're not reaching consensus, you're campaigning and competing, you are not Bitcoin, you're using Bitcoin history as a proof of stake for a new blockchain. And what I realized, oh yeah, this is just another coin. And then by going through, then I ended up going through all the threads and just reading all your points, and I was like, shit, I think I need to write to John and apologize to him, because I didn't understand your background, what you had done. I didn't obviously show any respect for it, and that's quite a humbling experience to go through. But you got my message.
It's the best compliment I can get in this space, honestly, for you to say that. Like, nobody ever says nice things when you're somebody like me. They just sometimes follow you and they think you're interesting and fun, and it's just slapstick to them, I guess, or something. But I do mean what I'm doing. I do mean what I'm saying, and it makes me really happy to hear that actually has influence sometimes.
It definitely had influence, and it influences my own personal behavior. And I can be an annoying. I can be so annoying at times, and I can put all kinds of bullshit out there. But going through that, not just yourself though, there's other people and other things I've followed. And the way I tried to explain it to somebody once is, I'm not really that technical. I tried to learn to program once. I tried to learn JavaScript because I'd learned HTML, and HTML is fairly easy. It's just a markup language. So I was like, next natural step is JavaScript. And I spent months on it, and I didn't really understand it. And then just one day it clicked, this kind of order in the flow of creating a script. I was like, but I don't know why it clicked. And I think that's kind of what's happened with Bitcoin. At some point along the line, it's just kind of clicked of why it's important, why it's different from everything else, why it deserves so much focus and defending, and therefore why so many other things feel like an attack on Bitcoin. And I don't know how that happens, but it just kind of happens, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's why I people like talk about the concept of Bitcoin being kind of like a sovereign sometimes. And I think I like to like hypothesize about the future and think, people like us are Bitcoin's army, and Bitcoin probably does need an army to defend its money. Like, if monies and governments have been so integrated for so many, centuries, why should we think that will stop? And it's why I somewhat jokingly called one of my projects Bitcoin Tel Pro, was because I thought it would be a funny way to flesh it out into something that maybe eventually we'll be able to organize people to have the same mind frame. It's just a t-shirt site right now, but I do have bigger ideas. I just have too many ideas, and I try to do too much.
I think a lot of us do that. That's quite interesting what you say about defending people's money, actually, because I watched a presentation from Luke Dash Jr. recently, and he was talking about upgrades to Bitcoin and how when they're considering upgrades, and always in the back of his mind, and I watched it a while ago, so I might not have this exactly correct, but always in the back of their mind, everything they're doing, they've always got to remember this is going to affect someone's money. Any decision they make, any upgrade, any change to the protocol, is going to affect Bitcoin that people own. And therefore, then I start to think about something like Ethereum, and it feels like there doesn't seem to be as much care and attention for the fact that this is people's money, with Ethereum. And that for me is a very clear difference. And therefore, when I ended up reading through Tuademisa's tweet storm recently, I was very much siding with him, knowing some of his stuff is probably not always correct. And then reading the responses, again, not everything was always correct, but I kind of felt like I warmed to the approach of the Bitcoiners and felt a little bit cold by the reaction of the Ethereum community.
Well, Ethereum, what Ethereum succeeded at was like capturing the hearts and minds of programmers, young programmers and people that were interested in making software and things like this. They saw this as a way to, kind of integrate the concept of money and getting rich with just fucking around making cool apps. But in the end, that's all it is. It's a big like role play, and so you have to go into that community with wanting to be somebody that's a builder and hang out with other builders and just make things and just not really think too hard about the actual fundamentals of the blockchain of Ethereum and what it should be worth, etc. And it becomes really hard to make them care about that because it pumped so hard, it went up so much, and the humans in this space, at least, they have a very difficult time decorrelating, the value of something in the marketplace, the price of it and speculation on it from its actual success or usability. And yeah, I don't like to see that happen. There was another thing I wanted to say that you made me think of. You talked about how Bitcoiners that have been around a while, when we explain something, that kind of degrades over time. And I heard you said when Luke was talking about an upgrade to Bitcoin. Well, see, like in the first few years that I was around, Bitcoin maximalism was way more hardcore than it is now. Like Bitcoin maximalism, is more like Bitcoin extremism. A real Bitcoin maximalist, if you were around back then, the word didn't exist back then, but a real Bitcoiner back then, you believe every single thing someone does to Bitcoin is an attack. That includes small soft fork upgrades from core. That includes any suggestion of a hard fork from anyone for any reason. And so this is what I mean when I say that Bitcoin can't die, because you can always use the original copy, and the original Bitcoin will never stop being mined. Maybe someday, a better upgrade that has full consensus fork will become worth more. I don't know. I'm skeptical. I'm really skeptical Bitcoin can hard fork successfully. But in the end, we have to. The only thing we can do as users is think of every single thing people want to do to Bitcoin as an attack.
And you've been around for quite a long time. You've obviously seen the growth of Bitcoin. You've seen how, in the last year there's been this like huge explosion. Well, last 2 years this huge explosion, but now we've kind of got this Wall Street adoption. We've got potential of an ETF. We've got futures. Like in the grand scheme of things, how do you feel about this? Do you feel it's net good for Bitcoin or net bad?
Overall, I think it doesn't. I don't think we have a choice. What's going to happen is going to happen, and it doesn't. So it's pointless to decide whether it's good or bad. But I think some of it is good and some of it is scary. I don't know if it's bad because it has to actually become bad to say so. I think the notion of a lot of money being tied up in Bitcoin value through an ETF or a major bank or things like this is very scary to me, because it's just centralized control, and it just means, they're going to all get wrecked at some point, some way. This always happens in Bitcoin. There's always, every few years, a huge central holder that really wrecks everybody. We're kind of overdue right now. It's been a while. Mostly, it's been going. The big losses have been coming through Ethereum mostly. They have regular losses of $10 to $100 million in Ethereum for various bugs, but it happens in Bitcoin too, and it happens when there's central custody. And so things like backed, things like ETFs and BitGo really scares me. Things like that scare me because I know that people don't really fully understand Bitcoin, and they'll feel like they're participating in Bitcoin when they're letting other people hold their keys.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So I'm doing another interview after this with Neil Woodfine and Matt Odell, where we're going to look at Bitcoin in 2019. And I noticed Neil put out this morning, Bitcoin's excited about January the 3rd Proof of Keys event. Also, Bitcoin is excited about Bitcoin ETFs, where all keys are held by centralized custodial third parties, thus introducing massive systemic risk into the market.
It's a good contrast, and I actually think neither of them are important. If we could, validate and ensure that everybody was withdrawing their coins from all the exchanges, it would be an interesting thing. But I just told you, I think people don't think of Bitcoin this way. I think there are going to be tons of people that just leave their coin on there, and any of the people that really feel deeply about this philosophy of holding your own keys probably already have their Bitcoin withdrawn anyway. So as far as testing this as a bank run, testing their reserves, or just making a statement, I don't think it's going to work. It's fun, it's nice, and it's a good sentiment, but I don't think we'll see any real effect.
The only thing that was of interest that I noticed this morning is that HitBTC have been freezing accounts the day before today, basically.
I think that was a spin on the news outlet that released that. I don't know that they're correlated. As far as I know, HitBTC is, as far as I know, I don't want to slander, or as far as I know, they've always been a shady exchange and somebody to not really feel comfortable leaving your coins on anyway. Any of these altcoin exchanges that let you make accounts without KYC, or any of them that like really list the bottom of the barrel shitcoins, there's really, really high risk there, because eventually they get hacked or something and they don't tell people and they become fractional, and they do little tricks like surprise KYCing customers to see who's too scared to actually KYC, and they do all these little tricks to kind of take your money away, and eventually they get closed down or they die. And so I wouldn't mess with those kind of exchanges. Very high risk.
Right, so before we start getting into some of the attacks on Bitcoin, I've just got a couple of other questions for you just to help tee it up. I heard an interview with you in the past where you said you're not against all altcoins and that you like the idea of another strong chain. Where's your position on this at the moment? Is there any other projects you like?
This is mostly deriving from me always thinking in a contrarian way. This is just my way of kind of finding the path to what actually makes sense. And so I'm always skeptical, and I always like to look at the current reality. The current reality is there is a high demand for altcoins. They are serving a purpose to people. Whether that purpose is redundant and imaginary or purely greed or speculation and scamming, I don't know for sure. But the fact is they exist, and we should try to understand why. And if we understand why, we can make a better argument as to why they may not in the future. Like I told you earlier, I still think Bitcoin is the primary, but these things do exist, and there may be utility in just the simple idea of transferring value on a blockchain. You only have to trust it while you use it. So even if they are low trust, as long as they're not being attacked the moment you use them, they do serve. You can use them to transfer value. Not high value, they may have less liquidity and there's still more risk and these kinds of things. But if you have some kind of reason, some kind of need to move value over crypto as cheaply and fastly as possible, maybe altcoins sometimes are better. You just have to make sure you can realize the liquidity you need for the moment you need it. I'm skeptical now that we have SegWit and Lightning and other ways to send cheap Bitcoin quickly, but I think eventually these use cases go away. But I also like to think of Bitcoin in sort of like a biological way, which I'm really happy to see a lot of people talking about lately, talking about Bitcoin being a fungus or a living organism. This is a concept I wanted to write about a long time ago, but I was too lazy. But so I'm glad somebody's writing about it.
Did you see the stuff Dan Held wrote about it?
I haven't read it all, but I want to. I've definitely been keeping tabs and seeing there are at least 2 or 3 people writing about this now, and it's a concept I think is very interesting, not just because it's sparks your creativity, but because maybe it will help us in design theory in the future. Like if we think of Bitcoin as an organism that is spread around the whole world, like do we really only want one organism? If decentralization matters, is only one coin good enough? Certainly there's an efficiency to everybody cooperating there, and that's what Bitcoin maximalism is primarily about. But I don't know. I mean, what if it's cool to have? What if there's some kind of utility to have multiple? I don't think we need 1,000 shitcoins, but I don't know everything,
It's quite interesting. So having made and lost a lot of money with Bitcoin and shitcoins, which is, by the way, a wonderful experience. My kind of view now is the position I've decided to take is, would I use it and would anyone use it? And I know you're not a fan of stablecoins, and we can talk about that in the future, but I did an interview with Zach Prince, and he said there's a huge demand for borrowing dollars around the world. In certain markets, say Argentina, there is no point people putting all their money in Bitcoin, but there is it's kind of really a fintech use case, but someone can borrow dollars from BlockFi that can then get transferred to their local exchange, which they can then transfer into their local currency. And I was like, right, I don't love stablecoins, but I understand the use case. And then I saw something yesterday about drop gangs. Have you seen about drop gangs?
No.
So this is the progression from dark markets, whereby they're using private communication networks because there's a risk of trading on dark markets because of they can get closed down or exit scams. So what they do is they create these private chat groups which people can be part of. Someone chooses to make a purchase, and then they will give them the coordinates and like a location of where the drugs have been left. Yet still,
like
still paying it.
You ever hear of a project called Dropzone?
No.
This was a project by actually Krista Rose and some guys, I think, where they wanted to do something similar, complementary to Counterparty, where they were using basically a blockchain as a way to establish drop zones for people to make P2P trades. I don't know if that they ever finished it, but this is what it reminds me of. Yeah, I think black market stuff, anon stuff. I have some kind of weird theories about that too, where I wonder if fungible coins are and need to be fungible themselves as networks. In other words, I used to talk for a while about how Bitcoin fungibility, and how people confuse the concept of fungibility with privacy or anonymity, and they're not. They may be complementary or appear together, but they're not the same thing. I think my theory is that it might be possible that it's better to have Bitcoin be relatively infungible and have things like layer twos or even separate coins that are completely anonymous, because we need to see how much they will be attacked because of their anonymity. And it might be better to have something small like Monero performing this and kind of being under the radar, and then it may get too big one day until it gets attacked, and then there'll be another privacy coin that people will use, because you don't need to save your money. You don't need to use privacy coin as gold. You only need to use it for transfer. So, and I think another weird theory I have is I think that this kind of shows in the Monero price as well. If you look at the charts, it's like not the same correlation as other altcoins. You can almost see when people are seeking liquidity there and taking liquidity just to strictly move money around.
You don't see that some people might want to hold value in a private chain because of...
Well, the reason is to speculate. I don't, you know what I mean? I think, look, Bitcoin is, if you want to save money long term, there is no better way to do it than to hold Bitcoin. You're never going to out trade Bitcoin. You're never going, most people, 95, 99% of people are not going to out trade Bitcoin appreciation. They're not going to find a better store of value on the long term. If there's something you want to save for and you have 4 years plus to save for it, all of that money should be in Bitcoin, in my opinion. That's your gold. But you can make a lot of money holding Ethereum in the right 6-month span. You can make a lot of money holding Monero for the right, pump. But as far as using it as a store of value, why would you gamble?
Wow. Equally, you can lose money by getting the wrong 6 months. And it's quite interesting because, we started late because I told you I was syncing my the Monero blockchain because I decided to get rid of all my shitcoins in the end. I just got fed up with it all. I don't want to trade. I'm not very good at it. So I just got rid of everything. I thought I'm just going to hold Bitcoin and Monero.
Don't you at least feel better now?
Do you know what? I feel a couple of things. Firstly, huge amount of regret. Like, I'm not hiding anything because I've told people this. I lost pretty much the majority of my Bitcoin. And at one point, I traded up to like 150. So this is nothing that's not been put out there. I don't feel a huge... Actually, and I lost most of it mining. And I don't feel like a huge amount of regret. Like, I'm not bothered in the long run. It's slightly annoying, but I feel like having a go at mining, I've learned a lot and I've contributed to the security. And, if my loss there is collateral damage for the growth of Bitcoin, look, I can take that up. What I've come to appreciate now, though, is that time preference stuff. It's like, I've got my Bitcoin. If I don't sell in it, I've still got my Bitcoin. But what I can do now is focus on the things that I know that I'm good at, which is marketing and consulting. And then I can use that to accumulate more Bitcoin. And, I might never get back to that 150, but I was always worried, like, shit, should I trade these out because I'm losing Bitcoin? I don't have to worry anymore. I've just got Bitcoin. But on that Monero now you're making me think, man, maybe I should get rid of my Monero.
Well, see, that's the thing is I've been around for a while and I've known a lot of traders and I still know a lot of them. And the way I always saw that was if I was ever having to focus on the price of Bitcoin, God forbid some shitcoins too, it's like it's so demanding of your attention that you can't even function as a human being other than being a speculator and trader. And I really feel like even though trading is by far the biggest use of Bitcoin volume right now, and in crypto volume in general, by far. We can talk about this a little in relation to exchanges and actual crypto businesses. Even though that's the case, I think that these people eventually all come to a point where they have to make a decision. They have to decide, do I want to be a professional trader as a career, and do I like this, and can I handle it? Or am I just gambling and pretending and playing a game until I lose all my money? And that's really, it's as black and white as that to me. So I think you have to really be deciding, okay, I'm going to pay for my education to learn how to trade. I'm going to lose some money, and hopefully I'll make a lot of money, and hope I can do it consistently and have a good discipline for it. Or I'm going to gamble and pretend I'm a trader and only tell people when I win, and go home and cry when I lose, and feel like a dirtbag for, as many years as it takes me to give up.
Next up, I talked to John Moore about defending Bitcoin and his hopes for 2019. But before that, I have a message from my show sponsor. So let's talk about BlockFi. And they've now been sponsoring the podcast since September. They've appeared in 25 shows, and they've now extended well into Q2. So why have they stuck with the podcast? Well, these ads work. I've got to know them, they've got to know me, I understand what their business is doing, and I can tell you more about it. I can tell you the evolving story. And in the 4 months they've been sponsoring the podcast, so much has happened for them. The CEO, Zach Prince, has been on the podcast. You should check that out. That's episode 51 if you want to find out more about the future of banking and crypto. They've also raised an additional $4 million of funding, which they'll be using to expand their team. They've got a crypto savings account coming where you can earn interest, and they've also got crypto-backed credit cards coming. They've added support for Litecoin as collateral, and they have stable coins as a funding option, and so many other things. So definitely check them out. Definitely keep an eye on them. So much happening with them this year. And if you are interested in a crypto-backed loan, well, BlockFi is the leading crypto to USD lender. They service customers worldwide, including 47 US states, and they've got interest rates now as low as 4.5%. If you sign up at blockfi.com/whatbitcoindid, you can get $25 in free crypto added to customer collateral loans for under $10,000, or $50 in free crypto added to customer collateral loans over $10,000. And applying takes less than 2 minutes. That is blockfi.com, which is blockfi.com/whatbitcoindid. And you know what? That's why I'm so glad I'm out of it, because not checking the price all the time is great. Not worrying about the price. Also, it's quite a lonely experience trading. You're just trading and talking to people on Twitter. You're not actually building anything. Like with my podcast, at least I feel like I'm building something and I'm contributing. And when I look at the end of the month, and in December it was 108,000 downloads, and that's like, wow, I really feel like I've contributed something and given something back, and and the fact that I can make a living off it is great. When you're trading, I kind of realize that it is really a zero-sum game outside of Bitcoin, if these things go to shit. And therefore, you've got to get yourself comfortable with the fact that you're going to make money off other people losing money and feeling crap. And I'm kind of not comfortable with that personally anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's part of it. I don't think too much that way. I do think it's healthy to understand that there's two sides to every trade. But no, I don't think trading is for everybody, despite it being what most people do.
All right, man. Well, listen, look, let's start talking about the attacks on Bitcoin. And, before we do, it's like you obviously, you talked about the army. You feel like some need to defend Bitcoin. Where does that come from?
I honestly am not sure. What would be the most obvious answer is I could say to you, oh, I want to protect the value of the amount of Bitcoin I hold. But man, there have been times when I've had no Bitcoin and I've done it the same exact way. I think maybe it's also protecting all of the effort I've put in already, and understanding and translating this to people. Because I'm not like the most technical person, but I try really hard to at least understand the concepts in a way that I can explain them to other people. And someone told me in the past that demonstrating understanding is translation. If you can translate something to someone else, then you understand it. And so I do take value in that.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I actually did think recently of, why don't I just sell all the rest of my Bitcoin, be completely impartial, and then when people kind of
that's bullshit. I'll tell you the opposite story. When I was around the time that I did the Roger Ver interview, I had a friend say to me, he said, "Man, if you're going to be making videos like this, the way to make money is you need to be holding as much fucking Bitcoin as possible." And I didn't really understand him immediately. I'm like, "What do you mean? Like, nobody's paying me for this. I'm not going to get anything out of this." And he's like, "No, when you do this stuff, you have to hold Bitcoin. Like when you go out there and you fight for Bitcoin, you make content for Bitcoin, the way that you get paid is by holding Bitcoin. That's how you get paid to be who you are. And if you don't do that, you're just going to screw yourself. You're like, and he was so right, because like at the time Bitcoin was worth like 6,000. It hadn't hit 20 yet, you know? And so it was just like, I don't know, weird. It was a weird serendipitous moment. And it really, you know, gave me another reason to say why I do this. You know, it's to say that the way that you make money in Bitcoin is by having Bitcoin and defending it, and or improving the infrastructure, or providing services and products related to Bitcoin. You know, this is how you make money in Bitcoin, and you just have to stick around long enough to catch the next halvening, or, you know, major wave of adoption, and then you're taken care of.
That's a great point. And we'll come to Roger because we both interviewed him. Okay,
Yeah.
so there's various attacks on Bitcoin that I've noticed, but I think probably the most obvious one and the most scary one on reflection for me, and you might disagree, but S2X seemed to me to be the biggest attack on Bitcoin. And it took me it wasn't probably till about a year after it, maybe even longer, that I fully understood the threat posed. You know, you hear all these people who are anti-core, who have a pop at core, who think they've and Blockstream, and they've held Bitcoin back, blah blah blah. And I actually did an interview with Brian Bishop recently, and he said a really interesting statement. He said, no core developer wakes up and thinks, what can I do today to improve the price of Bitcoin? And I've come to really appreciate the slowness and the careful way that Bitcoin has been developed, and appreciate things like what Luke Dash Jr. said about protecting income. And it seems to me that actually the scaling and the potential fork with S2X was probably one of the biggest attacks on Bitcoin.
It was definitely one of the biggest. I don't know if I will say it's the biggest, because like we have to talk about Roger Ver. And in the context of what Brian Bishop said to you, you know, I agree. That's true. I don't go on Twitter thinking, how can I make the Bitcoin price go up? I don't do this interview with you for that reason, even though it kind of sounds like I did from the last statements I just made. I'm not thinking that at all. But it's exactly what Roger Ver is thinking when he wakes up in the morning, is how can I make Bitcoin Cash be worth more? He's not thinking about, you know, improving it and making sure it scales and lasts forever and this kind of stuff. He's thinking, how can I reap the most from these people? That's my opinion. And so I think the biggest attack on Bitcoin is Roger Ver and Bitcoin Cash. I don't know how related that is to S2X or Bitmain, or how tied all those things are, if they're all just one thing anyway. But that would be my choice for the biggest attack, largely because he has funding and he owns Bitcoin.com. And he's willing to be a two-faced person and manipulate people and call Bitcoin Cash Bitcoin. This is a much more subversive and difficult attack. I think it's failing now. I think at this point it's becoming more and more irrelevant. But you know, last year it was scary, and for the past year, SegWit2x, yeah, that was a big attack. I remember when it came. I remember immediately giving Barry Silbert shit on Twitter. He took a little Twitter break after. Just engaging with everybody I could. There's a series you can find of me where I did like 50 different tweets to every single person that signed it, asking them why they signed it.
I've got to read that. That's really interesting, because I heard in a different interview, I can't remember who, about Barry taking a break. I didn't realize there was like something that happened.
I don't know for sure if it was just me or what, but I remember like I came at him immediately about it, and we got into an argument, and he used a similar argument that Roger Ver did in our interview. He said something like, you know, he Johned me. He said, John, you do know that I have funded the most Bitcoin companies and the most crypto, and I run, you know, like he tried to credential me, and I said, no, it doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with this. Yeah, if you want me to help you find it, let me know.
Well, that's quite interesting as well, because if you go into the mailing list discussions, one of Roger's very early points was that the companies on the mailing list serve millions of Bitcoin users. And I'm thinking, yeah, you do, but you don't speak for those people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they wanted to decide these things for the users. They never asked the users. They never polled them. I'm sure they didn't, because the users probably didn't even give a shit. You know, they don't know what's what. And it's the core people of Bitcoin that are the ones that are, you know, actually analyzing this stuff, and even more so with developers, etc. People like Jimmy Song and Jameson Lap and all these people that actually dig into it. But the users at Coinbase. Come on, Coinbase says it has what, like 20, 30 million people. Who the hell are these people? They probably don't know that much about Bitcoin. They probably just had somebody, they heard about it and they wanted some, and that was about the extent of it.
Well, it kind of comes down to that thing sometimes where someone will argue about democracy and they'll say, yeah, but, for example, with Brexit in the UK, a lot of people have said, well, most of the people voting for Brexit don't really understand it, so they don't know what they're voting for. And you could kind of probably make the same argument for this if it came down to the users.
I don't understand it. I don't know the details of it. It's probably true.
So what do you first remember about when it all kind of first started to happen? Because my first memory of it, and the first thing that kind of was a red flag to me with my very limited understanding of the background of Bitcoin, was a secret meeting. I just heard about this secret meeting behind closed doors, and I thought, that just doesn't sound right.
Back then, there was a little bit of a small trend of secret meetings. Back then, like they have this Satoshi's Roundtable that Bruce Fenton tries to put on every year, and if you're a Bitcoin VIP, you can get invited and go to this thing and spend $3,000, $4,000, and go to a resort for a few days and hang out with people. I went once, and it was mostly like role playing as if we were all important, but there was when I went, there were some secret meetings. There were people from major companies, and you could see, like for example, I'm not supposed to talk about this stuff. I can't say specific people. You could see certain people from certain big companies getting really upset about things, and they were probably arguing about scaling stuff. And I think at some point, companies like Coinbase and Digital Currency Group, they basically decided that the core developers were just too stubborn, and they were never going to listen to reason, and so they felt like they had to do something, but they never really stopped to check themselves and say why they felt this need and why they felt they had this power. And it was always just for commerce. It was never for Bitcoin. It was always for self-enrichment, the success of their own companies. And conceptually, you have to understand that when you do Bitcoin in business, you have two choices. You make Bitcoin your best friend, or you make it your biggest enemy. And Coinbase decided to make Bitcoin its worst problem. It decided not to align with Bitcoin, and Barry Silbert and the New York Agreement was part of an extension of this kind of feeling. I do think Barry likes Bitcoin. I've never had a personal conversation with him, but I think he sees reason in balancing business and balancing how much he actually cares,
Yeah, so I heard an interview with him with Laura Shin where he talked about he just wanted to break the deadlock, and he felt like he was somebody who could broker that. And it was said, like, I didn't 100% believe him, but I didn't 100% disbelieve him. I kind of didn't know what to think.
I think, well, the deadlock was imaginary. The deadlock was his narrative that allowed him to behave in this way to correct his perceived problem, or their perceived problem, that Core was stubborn and would not do what needed to be done. But Core has always been doing what needed to be done, as far as I can tell. And Core is not even like a thing. Core is just what you name the people that work on Bitcoin. They don't have as much cohesiveness as people think they have. There's plenty of disagreement. There's plenty of decentralized aspects to just the people working on that code. And to point at them as if they're an organization that won't cooperate and fix this problem was all imaginary in the first place. Luke Jr., he argues that the block should be smaller. It's not a crazy argument. There is reason to it. And so for me, the obvious thing was just that they wanted to fork, and there was no consensus. It should have been the end of it. As soon as they realized that there was any notable amount of people that would fight this, that they should have known before they even started that would be this way. It was pointless, because you saw in my comments in the threads and things like this, and my comments with Vinny Lingam in the video I did with him on Twitter, etc. It was always destined to fail, and it failed fucking gloriously.
And it was quite interesting going through that experience of somebody who isn't hugely technical, who was trying to figure out, maybe big blocks are a good thing, because you're coming in new, you don't understand the full background. You've heard about this guy, Roger Ver, who's done so much for Bitcoin. He's put so much money in. You're like, oh, he must be some kind of cool guy. You don't know all the maybe like less than honest things he's done. And then you'll hear an explanation, well, it's meant to be money and the blocks are full. We can't get enough transactions. So, okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense. oh yeah, these small blocks, they don't make sense. Like, you can easily be swayed for a period of time, and it's very easy to be influenced, which is why at the time, look, I got a lot of shit for interviewing Roger, because I interviewed in a very different way from you, but I was genuinely at that point where I didn't fully understand why small blocks are more important than big blocks. And like you say, now I've seen the Luke Dash argument for 300k block size. I'm like, yeah, I mean, that sounds like a good argument as well. But, understanding like the cost of nodes, why nodes are important for decentralization, how block size is important. I tell you, actually, what a real turning point for me is when Tom Woods hosted a debate between Jameson Lap and Roger.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a time when Jameson wanted bigger blocks. Hearing that debate was a real game changer for me for understanding block size and why it needs to be small.
Yeah, I remember actually. The first time I met Jameson Lap was at one of these conferences, and at the time we had kind of had a little bit of Twitter fights. He probably wouldn't even remember, but I did see him as one of the evil Bitcoiners. He worked for BitGo. I don't like Mike Belch at all. I think they're a scary company. I don't like the concept of what they're doing. Apparently, people see a need for it, but Jameson kind of turned around once he left BitGo. He became a real authority and influencer from a technical side of Bitcoin, and everybody seems to really get a lot from him. So I'm glad that happened.
And then eventually the whole thing collapsed anyway. And again, I would say the final point that made me realize that it was fully bad was when I was reading about replay protection. Again, I don't understand the technical side of things, but I was just like, well, why would you have confusion? Why would you add this confusion when you don't need to? And again, I'm going to quote you. And you put in there, the funny part is the lack of replay protection will hurt your fork more than help it. We tried to help you, you doubled down. We tried to educate you, you doubled down. Your goal must be disruption. And that became kind of clear, even for a non-technical person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, I have some good people that I talk to about Bitcoin concepts and stuff like this in private, and I have some of these debates in private before I have them in public, and that really, really, really helps me to be able to try to explain things in more eloquent ways like that.
All right, man. Well, S2X fell apart amazingly and gloriously.
Yeah, I mean, it couldn't have gone any better. I mean, it was like a golden time for Bitcoin, and for me, like doing the Vinny interview and then having SegWit2x fail like exactly like how I told him in every different way that I could, and then having the Roger Ver interview, and people wanted like they wanted somebody to hold him really accountable in an interview at least once, and I felt like I did my best to give that to them, and we gave them a happy ending too.
I tell you what was quite interesting, and it's on Reddit, so I can kind of almost timestamp prove it. I was in Vegas when it collapsed, and the night before it was cancelled, I sold all my Bitcoin. I just went on Coinbase, sold the lot, and just thought, I'm not part of this. I don't understand it. I just want to hold money. And then what happened was the price crashed. The day after, I was like, I need to buy back in. I didn't know where it was going to bottom out, and I ended up buying back in just below the price I dropped out. So it was almost like an even trade, but it was a really strange time. All right, well, let's move on to Roger, because we both interviewed him with very different experiences. I went because I wanted to learn. And also, I'd interviewed Lynn Olbrich, Ross's mum, and, we'd had a long conversation about how Ross had supported the family. And, I was like, well, this guy's not all bad. And very interestingly, I've told people my 45 minutes with Roger after the interview, no mics, no cameras, was a very different experience. And he was a very different person from I see in all the interviews. I'm not justifying anything he's done. So you feel like Bitcoin Cash was a bigger attack?
I feel like the efforts of the people that support Bitcoin Cash, the actual creation of it, initially I didn't really think it was a big deal. I think the inception of Bitcoin Cash was basically Bitmain, I think it was, warned the public that if the SegWit2x fork failed, that they would still make a coin anyway, and if X and Y happened, I forget their stipulations, and then those stipulations weren't quite met, and they did it anyway, or they did it early, and then we had Bitcoin Cash, and then all of a sudden Craig Wright and Roger Ver and Jahan, and then all these exchanges are supporting it, and everybody's yelling at the exchanges that won't support it because they want their free money, and I'm just like, oh God, like what the hell is happening here? Like why is this a thing? Why is everybody taking this seriously? I remember having private conversations with people I've known in Bitcoin for years, where they just started the narrative just started eating into their brains, and they started believing that maybe this is a real thing and this is like something that needs to happen, and they just started buying it. And I had to like get into so many arguments with people that are like close to me, trying to like remind them, like, come back to earth, please come back, guys, like this is all a dream. It's been hard. It really frustrates me what Roger does and how he's doing it.
Bitcoin Cash is heading towards zero. It like most things you say, it probably won't die because there's always some scenario, but it's heading towards major irrelevance. It's just not being used. Roger's also experienced his own contentious fork with Bitcoin SV. Again, just
that was their biggest mistake for sure. That this fork they just had, I think, might have been the death knell for them. It sucked away all interest. It sucked away the last amount of speculators that were willing to throw extra money at it. I think it was just a liquidity event. They just wanted to do a little marketing hype to generate some liquidity, get people to get their airdrop, and the whole thing just feels stale to me now.
Yeah, I've almost losing interest in it, and then when it actually happened, I was asked about it, and I was like, I don't really know much about it because I've just lost interest in it. But as it heads towards irrelevance, and there will come a time where the likes of Craig and Roger will have to give up on it. People have asked about and said about Roger coming back to Bitcoin, and will he be welcome back? And I kind of had this view that it's like nobody has a choice, and that's actually the great thing about Bitcoin. If he chooses to come back to the original Bitcoin and support it, no one can do anything about that. But how do you feel about that?
I think I have a tweet saying pretty much the same thing. I told him, I've told Roger in a tweet, maybe not even a month ago, so that he's welcome back anytime. And somebody said, why would you say that or something? I said, well, I don't have a choice. Like I would rather have him use his wily ways on something that I actually care about. But I would still correct him the same way. If he were in Bitcoin and he were trying, this is the thing about Roger, right? He has been saying the same stuff about Bitcoin for years. Before Bitcoin Cash, he used very similar arguments, but his original arguments came out of natural ignorance. They were forgivable. He wanted to promote Bitcoin as being fast and cheap and the same things he talks about Bitcoin Cash, but he didn't really appreciate, or maybe not even understand, how Bitcoin works and the fundamentals of how it is not a cheap thing and it is not an efficient thing, that it's expensive and it's redundant, and that the qualities that he's selling these people as to why they should come, it's like saying it's anonymous, all these things, they were all wrong at the core. And at the very best, they had a lot of subtlety to explaining how they achieve any amount of efficiency or cheapness or speed. And so if he came back and started doing that to get to Bitcoin, nobody would treat him any better. He would still get everybody correcting him all the time, because he's always thinking in ways and explaining things in ways that are like he's trying to sell something. He's not actually trying to help people. He makes it seem like he's trying to help people to get their money.
Would you say in hindsight, the Bitcoin Cash experience has been net good for Bitcoin as well, even though it's an attack, in that there's like a couple of things. I think it's kind of proved that Bitcoin isn't entirely about code. It's not about having the most efficient or the best code. It's about history and trust. But it also was a useful experiment in bigger blocks to see if they are interesting.
How useful? How is it useful? It doesn't prove anybody right. It doesn't prove anybody wrong. It's there as an example, I guess. And people say this about a lot of altcoins and things. And there are some examples where altcoins have affected Bitcoin, but in general, this is a tough argument. I do believe in the concept of anti-fragility, which I think is what you're getting at. And I do believe that whatever hurts Bitcoin also helps it. But it's a really hard thing to balance, because you don't get to see what would have happened otherwise. You don't get to see what would have happened if only 10% of the money that got put into crypto went into shitcoins instead of 50%. You don't get to see what would have happened if all the developers that worked on Ethereum worked on Bitcoin instead. We'll never get to know that. And I don't know which one's better. Yeah, the attacks are nice. They're nice to see that we can survive them. It's nice to see how we react and develop new techs to respond to them, how we react as a community, what we do to fight for Bitcoin. But I actually believe that the real way to maximize efficiency in Bitcoin and get the most out of it is cooperation. Like It's like a Ponzi scheme, okay? It's a Ponzi for the people. Like it's a Ponzi with no head, and if everybody gets on board, everybody will maximize their gains. You know what I mean? And I don't just mean that in purchasing power. I mean that in utility, infrastructure, community, everything. If we just move to one coin, then everybody is going to be a lot happier. But there's still going to be the volatility to get there, pains, etc. So I don't know. We'll never know whether it's good or bad for Bitcoin.
The anti-fragility thing's really interesting. I always like to think of it as like an immune system, and the immune system gets stronger. Okay, so Ethereum. Is Ethereum an attack on Bitcoin itself? I certainly think in some ways it is, because it's created, and almost it feels like by design by Vitalik, a anti-Bitcoin army. How do you feel about it?
I don't know. Sort of. I would say Ethereum people don't seem to be that interested in attacking Bitcoin too much. But anything that is cryptocurrency or blockchain always has to. They have no choice. They have to paint themselves in the light of Bitcoin. They have to refer to themselves. I say this like basically like stable coins. They wouldn't be called stable coins if it wasn't referring to Bitcoin's volatility. They'd be called fiat coins or Gemini coins, or you know what I mean? They would never be called stable coins.
I've never thought of that.
Shit coins are called shit because they're shit compared to Bitcoin. They're called alt because they're an alternative to Bitcoin. Everything is talking about itself in the context of Bitcoin.
I don't even want to talk about Ripple coin. Although the only thing about that, they've created like this weird cult community of people who really don't understand much, but how to regurgitate nonsense messages and attack Bitcoin with already proven FUD.
Right. I mean, they over the years they come up with formulas, and it's actually a whole cyclical process that comes along with each wave of adoption. In the early days, they had the first Bitcoin Ponzi schemes, and those had to paint themselves against Bitcoin by saying that you would earn more Bitcoin every day. And then they had Bitcoin securities and Bitcoin derivatives, and these were all centralized. They weren't on ICO tokens yet. But all this already happened years ago in 2013, 2014. We already had the ICO craze. It happened before. I saw it already. That's why I knew how this one would turn out. And it will happen again. I don't know for sure what the flavor will be, but it's just an iteration. Every cycle, all the scammers iterate on what the scammers did before, and they do this to exploit the ignorance of new money. And so adoption brings gravity to Bitcoin, brings money and value to Bitcoin, and everybody's fighting to take it away from Bitcoin. Everybody's trying to take your Bitcoins and take your money and keep you away from Bitcoin.
And is there like a new layer of defense now with Lightning Network? Because there seems to be, if you can't attack Bitcoin, attack Lightning or attack the two.
I mean, the attacks on Lightning are pretty laughable mostly. I do think that there is good arguments saying about how there's complexity to it, and how getting adoption and getting it actually integrated into society through commerce and business and users is going to be a lot more work. But the tech is sound. The tech works. Calling it centralized, saying you can't trust it, that you'll lose money, whatever, all these things, they're nonsense. They're just stupid narratives that people like Roger Ver say, etc. It works. I've seen it work. I've been there. I've run a node. The company I work for is supporting. We have new technology that's, new features allowing people to use it in different ways that we're going to be announcing. It's just going to take longer than people want it to, and this just gives the altcoins something to say. It gives them an argument, and their whole job is to market against Bitcoin, to say why Bitcoin is bad and they're better, so they can take your money.
All right. Well, I think you've articulated well plenty of defense of Bitcoin. Before we look forward, is there any other like attacks on Bitcoin I've not talked about that you think are relevant that people should be aware of?
I think that trading is one. We talked about it a little bit, but I think that the illusion that you can make money trading, and the illusion that's provided by knowing someone who got rich on some shitcoin that 100x'd, I actually think that trading is a really, really horrible thing for people. Professional traders is not what I'm talking about. People that know how to trade or have a serious interest in becoming a professional trader, it's a fine expertise. It's work you can do from anywhere, But most people can't come close to having the discipline, to having the understanding and of risk management and doing this the way properly. They're just gambling and they don't know it, and it's a brutal process to watch people lose money. I have so many stories of people this year telling me about how they got wrecked doing this or that on the way up and on the way down, and I think that at this point it's just the exchanges are just trying to milk everything they can from everybody, and it looks okay because it's just taking fees, but they have such sophisticated traders, machine learning algorithms that will detect every amount of retail volume that gets put anywhere. They measure the amount of, who's short versus who's long across all kinds of exchanges, and they have way more information than you, and you're just there to give them your money. And you'll win once in a while, but eventually, the house is going to just take everything from you. And I think that is a huge attack. I would hate to see everybody lose all their Bitcoin and it all being held by JP Morgan and shit like this, and them having major influence over Bitcoin because they now hold all the traders' money.
Quite interestingly, one of the New Year's resolutions I created was to create more education, because I think education is like, in terms of like football, we talk about like attack is the best form of defense. But I think in terms of Bitcoin, education is a very good form of defense. But one of the areas I kind of get lost on is like, for example, if I was to use my website, I was thinking of doing like a separate 10 podcast series, like for somebody who's got no experience of Bitcoin, to take them through like 10 half-hour lessons from what it is, security, why it's important, etc., etc. And I was thinking within there, how do you handle altcoins and projects? Do you criticize them and just promote maximalism, or do you educate and allow a free market? And I was really confused on what the right thing to do would be.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of in line with what I was just saying, I think. I definitely understand this because I'm always trying to educate new people coming in, and it's hard to tell what works, and it really depends on why they're here. In the past wave really brought a lot of people that wanted to speculate on altcoins. So it became much more talking about, how this is, you have to associate this with gambling and be honest with yourself about what you're trying to do. And you have to understand that you're not just going to get rich quick, that this is all luck, that it's not skill for the most part, for most people. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard to figure out. I haven't figured it out. I've been doing it for 6 years, trying to learn and educate other people and get them quickly to appreciating what Bitcoin is and why it's worth what it is. And it's always hard, man.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, listen, we've done a good hour already. Let's look forward. So tomorrow's a 10-year anniversary of the protocol, which is pretty amazing. Survived a lot. What would you like to see over the next 10 years, and where do you think we may be in 10 years' time? Which is a huge question. I appreciate.
I want things. I honestly, I would just like to see things keep going the way they're going. I would like to see us continually have, a cycle where we achieve the all-time high again every 4 years with the halvening. I like to think of Bitcoin is always worth its all-time high price. It's just a matter if you want to wait till it gets there again. And I would like to see that continue. I know this sounds like a speculator and greedy of me, but no, I think you have to have the market cap to be able to continue to support and attract, adoption and more people. They all go hand in hand, liquidity, etc. I would like to see layer 2 technology flesh out and actually succeed in being how most people use Bitcoin. See Bitcoin get to being more of a way of storing the main net being the main chain being more of a way of storing your Bitcoin instead of using it. What else would I like to see? I would like to see a kind of culling of the altcoin confidence. If they keep pumping harder than Bitcoin every time Bitcoin pumps, it's going to make my job really hard. And I just want there to be this one day where we all wake up and Bitcoin went up $50,000 for some reason, and all the altcoins didn't move. That's what I want. So I can say, look, I told you guys, you should have just bet on Bitcoin. You should have appreciated that it is, the core thing, because now you're all left behind and you're never going to be able to have a whole Bitcoin again.
Okay, that's pretty cool. We've done a really good show here. Before we finish, how's it going at your new job?
Pretty good. maybe you read the blog post, but I'll summarize briefly. I still am doing the video streaming site, Exotica, which is Bitcoin only, and basically the bear market made it really hard to keep. We only hold Bitcoin, and so I just kept spending, and I was just like, man, I can't spend at these prices. I need to be earning at these prices. And so I went back out and just kind of put feelers out to see if there were any people that would be interested in working with me. And I did it very, very broadly, and immediately Sergey, who's also got into Bitcoin around the same time, and he has a similar background to me as well. And, learning about Bitcoin and his history with it, he just said, hey, let's get on a call. And we got on a call, and I learned more about the product. And I feel like gift cards is something that's always been a use case for Bitcoiners, because it's like gift cards do what utility tokens and altcoins are supposed to do. They're supposed to be like a specialized way of holding money. Having a Starbucks card for your coffee is much more sensible than using Bitcoin Cash for your coffee, right? So all these utility tokens and things, they don't give you any utility at all. People just buy them to speculate. They have no fixed value on any of these platforms. So why would anybody ever buy a utility token that didn't know what they were going to get for it 10 days from now? This is the case for things like, I don't know, what's the name of that project that does timestamps? Tyrion and Civic and these companies that why as a company or user would I ever buy these tokens and hold them and not know how much service I would get for them later? It makes no sense. The only utility tokens don't make sense unless people embrace them being centralized and backed by a specific amount of value or product or service. If you can't do that, they're useless. Well, I guess another use is some people are trying to use them as securities and pay dividends, which is brave. But yeah, that's how I see that.
All right, cool. And before we finish up, how do people stay in touch with you? Who do you want to hear from? Who do you not want to hear from?
Anybody can try to contact me, but you can find me on Twitter as Bitcoin Error Log. I have a blog on Medium. I don't post it too much, but I would like to more. With Bitrefil, I think we're going to be hopefully starting a new content series. It'll either be me or Sergey or both of us. I don't know if it would be blog or podcast format, but you may have seen me on Twitter talking recently about Bitcoin business concepts, and we have some concepts that we want to talk about, basically defining what it actually means to be a Bitcoin business. I don't think there's been enough conversation about this and enough abstract conversation and how you're supposed to do it. Things like I said earlier with you have to hold Bitcoin if you're going to be supporting Bitcoin, and if you don't, you're not going to get the most value out of it. And so I really want to do some kind of content around that.
All right, man. Well, listen, I'm glad we did this. I'm glad we rebuilt that bridge. This has been a real pleasure to do this.
Yeah, me too.
You're not far from me, actually, so I think at some point we'll probably have a beer in person. And,
yeah, if you want to come out here and visit, come anytime. Depending on when you come, depending on how good of a time we can have.
Do you still do the meetups?
Yeah, I was doing them weekly in the summer, but then as the price crashed and the winter came, it gets pretty cold here. I just started reducing the frequency. I'm doing the next one again for this year next week. And the topic is Bitcoin business concepts.
Interesting. Well, listen, I might come out for one nearer the spring then when the weather's a bit better and come and hang out. But look, right, thank you for responding to me when I reached out to you. Thank you for coming on. I've really enjoyed this.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, so what did you make of that? What did you make of everything John had to say? I think as some of these alt projects are starting to fail, we're seeing these 51% attacks. Token projects aren't shipping products. Protocols are seeming to struggle for adoption. The Bitcoin narrative of sound money and the blockchain is really only good for one thing is starting to make more sense to me. Maximalism is kind of a funny thing, and while I maintain I'm not one, I'm finding that over time all roads lead back to Bitcoin, and a number of the arguments and narratives from the maximalists, they're kind of starting to hold true. Still, I'm going to maintain an open mind. I've got some other interesting interviews coming up with alternative projects. I'm going to be speaking to some people who are working on ETH. I'm going to be speaking to some other protocols because I do myself want to learn and just be very clear about what the use of a blockchain is. But hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully you enjoyed the interview with John. As I said, if you've got any questions, you can reach out to me. My email address is hello@whatbitcoindid.com. And just a reminder that I'm off to Vegas, San Fran next week. Reach out to me if you want to meet up. I'm heading out to Tone Vase conference and I'll be competing in his poker tournament. I think there's a few places left in that if you're interested, and I know a few other people are heading out there. So yeah, if you're heading out, look forward to meeting you. And again, thanks to everyone who supports the show. From those who leave me a review on iTunes to those who sponsor the podcast, it all helps, and I just really appreciate everyone who supports what I do. If you want to help, there's a whole bunch of things you can do. Firstly, just listen to the ads. By supporting the sponsors, you support the podcast and you enable me to keep this going. So yes, definitely make sure you listen to the ads, don't jump them. And if you don't like the ads, well, become a Patreon subscriber. For $5 a month, you can get the show early and without ads. So head over to patreon.com/whatbitcoindid to do that. I've got 67 now, which is absolutely amazing. You can become a show sponsor. If you're interested in sponsoring the show, please reach out to me. You can drop me an email on hello@whatbitcoindid.com. We can schedule a call. We can talk about that. You can leave me a review on iTunes, or you can click on the subscribe button. You can follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Medium. I'm on Instagram. I'm at WhatBitcoinDid on everything, but my personal Twitter is at Peter McCormack. Reach out to me. DMs are open. You can check out my website. That's www.whatbitcoindid.com, and you can subscribe to my newsletter there as well. And finally, you can share this show out with your friends and family on social media. I've got a couple of other cool interviews coming up. I've got Tone Vase coming out on Friday, and next week I potentially have an interview which I'll probably get a bunch of stick for. And I'm also going to be interviewing a couple of ETH guys, looking at the counter arguments for the interview I had with Tua Demista. So keep an eye out for them. I hope you all have a great week. If you've got any questions, reach out to me. As I said before, my email address is hello@whatbitcoindid.com, and I look forward to hearing from you.